Friends and neighbors, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a good, if unsettled, Friday morning. So much is happening in our fine city. I understand your concern. I know you have many questions for me, and I will answer them as time and circumstances allow. First, let me clear the air. Yesterday, July 4th, the Continental Congress formally voted once and for all to declare our independence from the Kingdom of Great Britain. It's obvious that many of you welcome this news. You have long suffered the consequences of punitive actions imposed on us by King George and his government. On the other hand, some of you have prospered under British rule, or perhaps you have close ties to people in Great Britain. You may find today's news rather troubling. Precisely 4 weeks ago, Richard Henry Lee, speaking on behalf of the Virginia delegation, brought forth a resolution that stated, "These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states that are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved." Of course, the magnitude of this resolution threw Congress into a state of profound stillness. It was decided that time must be allowed for delegates to consult with their authorities in their home colonies. In the meantime, Congress appointed Mr. Adams, Mr. Jefferson, and me, along with 2 other delegates, to begin work on a document. The purpose of that document was to announce to the world why we were taking this drastic action, should the Virginia resolution ultimately pass. Our committee of 5 went right to work. We convinced Mr. Jefferson to author a first draft. Several days later, he asked Mr. Adams and me to offer our thoughts. I made a few suggestions as to style and wording. Mr. Adams offered several lengthy amendments, some of which Mr. Jefferson found helpful. Exactly 1 week ago, on Friday, June 28th, our committee presented our final draft to Congress for its consideration. On Saturday, Congress convened a brief session at which time it was decided that before our draft was to be considered, the matter of the Virginia resolution needed to be the first order of business when we next met. On Monday morning, the Virginia resolution was brought up for debate. At the end of the day, 9 delegations voted in favor. Pennsylvania, South Carolina voted against. Delaware was divided, and New York abstained. The resolution lacked the required unanimity. But on Tuesday morning, votes changed as Pennsylvania and South Carolina flipped from no to yes. The Delaware deadlock was broken when Caesar Rodney rode 80 miles through a fierce overnight storm to cast his vote for independence. New York continued to abstain. The final vote was 12 yes, with no delegations opposed. The Virginia resolution was adopted. Immediately, Congress turned its attention to our draft declaration. Debate raged through the remainder of Tuesday, all day Wednesday, and well into yesterday. By the time Congress finished its edits, 86 changes had been made to the committee draft. Finally, late yesterday, the delegations voted unanimously to accept our declaration. The document was signed by our President, Mr. Hancock, and our Secretary, Mr. Thompson, and rushed to the printer. Soon word spread, firing the rumors that have brought you out of your homes this morning. I fully expect that printed broadsides will soon be in our own hands. And just this morning, Congress authorized a formal public reading of our declaration at this spot at noon on Monday. Furthermore, as soon as printed copies are available, they will be sent with all speed to General Washington and his army as they are gallantly defending New York against British regulars. Our declaration will surely give our brave soldiers a clear sense of purpose. I have been authorized to paraphrase the key points of our declaration. A week ago, our lands were known as the United Colonies of North America, and King George was our sovereign. By the actions taken yesterday, we are now the United States of America, and no king rules us. People will ask, no king? By what authority do you propose to govern yourselves? Because we are honorable men, we owe you and the world an explanation. Congress agreed that certain principles are self-evident. We believe that all men are created equal and have God-given rights, including the preservation of life, the enjoyment of personal liberty, and the freedom to pursue a happy existence. In order to secure these God-given rights, men form governments. And those governments derive their power solely from the consent of the governed. If any government fails to provide the people's rights, it is the right of the people to alter it. If that new government continues to abuse these rights, it is the duty of the people to replace it with a system that will protect them from tyranny. Your representatives in Congress believe that your rights have been systematically violated by King George and his ministers. In order to prove this to the world, we enumerated 27 grievances against him. For example, he has imposed taxes on us without our consent. He has deprived us He has deprived us of our right to trial by a jury of our peers. He has maintained standing armies amongst us in times of peace. He has made judges dependent on his will alone. He has incited domestic insurrections against our people. Any king who does these things is a tyrant and is wholly unfit to be the ruler of a free people. We have not acted with rashness. We have tried to secure our rights by sending letters, petitions, and ambassadors to reason with the king, but he has rebuffed us at every turn. We have beseeched our English brethren to come to our aid, but they too have turned a deaf ear to our plight. Therefore, out of absolute necessity, we have dissolved all political ties to Great Britain. The United States is now a free nation. We assume the full rights to enter into treaties of alliance, levy war, conclude peace, and establish commerce, and do all things independent nations rightly do. I assure you that gentlemen assembled in Congress stand ready to hazard our lives, expend our fortunes, and pledge our sacred honor upon the success of this Declaration of Independence. Before I answer some of the questions you surely have, please allow me to exercise my personal privilege to inform you of my evolution from a loyal subject to a revolutionary leader. 70 years ago, I was born in Boston during the reign of Queen Anne. In my lifetime, I have been ruled by 3 kings: King George I, King George II, and until this week, King George III. As a lad of 10, I was placed in an apprenticeship to be trained as a printer under the tutelage of my older brother. At 17, I escaped my brother's harsh treatment and the tyranny of the Puritans who governed the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I arrived in this city as a runaway with no connections and only an odd assortment of small coins in my pocket. But I had a trade. I was a printer, and I proved to be a tolerable writer of English. By the age of 24, I ran my own printing shop and published the most profitable newspaper in the city. I married my good friend Deborah Reed, and we raised a son and daughter to adulthood. By utilizing the twin virtues of industry and frugality, I was able to retire from business at the age of 42. I have since devoted my life to public service and the study of science. Nearly 20 years ago, in 1757, the Pennsylvania Assembly sent me to London to represent your interests to our colonial proprietors, the Penn family. Over the next 17 years, I spent 15 years living in London. On my voyage to England, I wondered how I would be received. To my delight, most people treated me as a person of great renown. The Royal Society awarded me their prestigious Copley Medal for my work with electricity. That recognition and subsequent membership gave me access to the highest echelon in British society. The University of St. Andrews awarded me an honorary doctoral degree, and since that time many people have referred to me as Dr. Franklin. I must admit that I've done little to discourage the use of this title. I served as the colonial agent not only for Pennsylvania, but eventually for New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Georgia as well. Given the depth and breadth of my portfolio, and my fame gave me the appearance of being the voice for all of the colonies. Nearly a dozen years ago, when the Stamp Act was passed, it precipitated riots here in the colonies. Parliament was confounded by your opposition. I was called before the House of Commons to explain your reaction to the tax. I was questioned for more than 4 hours and asked more than 100 questions, one of which stands out. As I recall, the question was, what would happen if the Crown sent an army to enforce the tax? I told them plainly, an army cannot force a man to buy a stamp if he chooses to do without. If you send an army to America, the soldiers will not find a rebellion. They may indeed make one. Commons listened. A month later, the Stamp Act was repealed. It proved to be a hollow victory. Parliament immediately passed the Declaratory Act, which gave them the sole authority to make laws ruling over all the colonies in all cases whatsoever. I was born an Englishman and thought I would die an Englishman. But the more I fought for the rights of all Englishmen, the more disillusioned I became with our British rulers. Parliament imposed taxes on tea, paint, lead, glass, and much more. Their government closed some of our ports. King George, acting like some imperial conqueror, allowed his ministers to send armed troops to live among our peaceful citizens, which predictably led to the use of deadly force. By the time I departed England 16 months ago, I was convinced that our connection with the rotten state of Great Britain corrupted and poisoned us as a free people. Upon landing in Philadelphia, I learned hostilities had broken out in Lexington and Concord. I was immediately drawn into the firestorm of revolution when the Assembly appointed me to the Continental Congress. Most of the delegates in Congress knew me only by reputation. To those delegates, and perhaps to some of you, I was just a famous relic of some curiosity. Half of them were younger than my son. The presiding officer, Mr. Hancock, was only 38. The intense John Adams proved to be a gifted orator and a learned man. But at 39, he was 30 years my junior. I did not know these men. The gifted Thomas Jefferson was only 32. And the aristocratic Edward Rutledge of South Carolina was only 25. During the early meetings in Congress, many of these young men made fiery speeches while I sat stoically. I am an old man and may from time to time rest my eyes. But my ears are always open. And I heard their whispers. What's Franklin's game? What is he up to? Friends told me that more than one delegate insinuated that given my 15 years in London, I might be a spy for the crown. These young firebrands couldn't see that I was merely biding my time. They couldn't comprehend that I simply wanted to return home at the end of a long day to be with my daughter Sally and finally get to know Benny and Will, the two young grandsons I had just met. Please allow me to explain my initial silence as succinctly as I can. My son, William, was born out of wedlock to a woman I will not name. When my late wife Deborah and I entered into a common law marriage in 1730, it was part of our bargain that we would raise William as our own. We delighted in watching him mature. We gave him a fine education. He assisted me in some of my scientific experiments, and as an adult, I allowed him to join me on my mission to London. Because he was my son, he was appointed Royal Governor of New Jersey, a post he has held for more than a dozen years. My silence in Congress was out of respect for our relationship. I would not speak publicly until I could speak with him privately. That meeting took place over a year ago at the Bucks County estate of my dear friend Joseph Galloway. It started awkwardly, but after William, Joseph and I shared a bottle or two of good Madeira wine, our tongues loosened. I tried with all my powers of persuasion to win William and Joseph over to our cause, but I failed. William and Joseph have chosen their side, and I have chosen mine. I am an American, and I will do all I can to win our freedom from the tyranny of a monarch. On that fateful night, I lost a dear friend, and I lost my son. I only hope that you will not suffer the same fate with your family and friends now that the time has come to choose sides. Hear me when I close with this. No man who joins the battles ahead can take action lightly, whichever side he chooses. No, by joining me in defense of the principles outlined in our Declaration of Independence, you will cross a threshold from which there is no retreat. Should we fail, we shall hang. But if we succeed, you and I will carry the torch of liberty into the next century and beyond. Please join me if you dare. Thank you for your attention. I am Steve Nousen.
Oh, you chanted.
And it has been my privilege to be at Open Circle so many times. I thank you for the podium. I have been doing this work since the tricentenary of Benjamin Franklin in 2006. He lived to be 84 years old, and he saw much in his life. I will be happy to answer any questions you have going forward or going backward at this point in time.
Dr. Franklin, thank you for your kind remarks. There are many of us who have had a political estrangement with our children, and it hurts very deeply. And I would like to know how you were able to deal with your estrangement from your dear son, William.
I will never get over the pain I felt. Speaking as Stephen, he never got over of the pain of William being a traitor. At the time of this speech, William had been captured, taken from the governor's mansion, and was in prison in New Jersey. He still considered himself the governor of New Jersey. Just arresting him did not erase that. Eventually, William was taken to a terrible prison in Connecticut and forced to live in his own filth for a year. Franklin would have found that to be okay because he was an enemy at that point in time. How you deal with that is very, very difficult.
Thank you.
Dr. Franklin, did you ever get your opportunity to address the young firebrands at the Continental Congress, besides you're just listening to them? Did you get your opportunity to speak?
My silence ended after I broke with William. And so we spent that 16-month period crafting the Declaration, becoming revolutionaries, and doing everything we could to build a case against the Crown. Now, the Pennsylvania delegation, when that first vote was taken on the Virginia resolution, passed by one vote inside the delegation. Every delegation had one vote. And the delegates who had been appointed by the Assembly were split. It was only after the vote was taken on that Monday night that he went to John Dickerson and basically said, "Are you sure you want to continue to vote no against independence?" And the next day, 2 of the dissenting delegates made themselves absent, which flipped the Pennsylvania vote over. The Delaware vote was split 1-1. And if you're from Delaware, no applause for Delaware, every school child knows that Caesar Rodney, who suffered from a very bad cancer on his face, was extremely ill, and he had absented himself from the Congress. He had gone home to Dover. And when word reached him eventually that they needed him in Philadelphia, he did make that midnight ride of 80 miles to arrive at the Pennsylvania State House, muddied and bloodied, and cast the deciding vote for Delaware. New York abstained in both of those instances because they had no communication with their government back home. They had no instructions. Remember, Washington is fighting against the British with all of their might, all of their army, all of their navy, which was commanded by 2 brothers, the Howe brothers. And he was fighting for his life and the life of his army in New York at that time. So it's no wonder that New York abstained from that resolution. But Franklin was a very, very instrumental person in working the Congress. He was a peacemaker. During the 86 amendments that changed Jefferson's draft, Jefferson was beside himself. He thought he had written a masterpiece. He had given it to the two most learned men on his committee for revisions. That was enough. In Jefferson's mind, he'd handed over a perfect document on June 28th. But the delegates had their own way. One of the 86 amendments was striking one of the grievances. There remained 27 in the end. But one of the 28 grievances was to condemn the king for the slave trade. And young Edmund Rutledge, 26 years old then, vociferously objected to that being included in the final document, and it was removed. That perhaps, after 1619, is the second greatest sin that we did to humanity, and not including that in the Declaration. There's a question all the way in the back.
Dr. Franklin, it took supreme courage to affix your names to this, because in doing so you potentially signed your death warrant with the British troops. What was the response of the British troops in the days and weeks after that, or the British monarchy?
Okay, this is an important point that has changed over the years. You see these men lining up to sign the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776. Didn't happen. 2 signatures were on the Declaration as amended. John Hancock as presiding officer, and Charles Thomson, without a P, was the secretary. And as soon as those signatures were gained, they sent it off immediately to the printer to make sense of all of the amendments and get it printed out. And if I'm speaking on July 5th, by the end of that day, Mr. Dunlop, the printer, had published the broadsides. They were being circulated around Philadelphia and on their way to New York for General Washington. The official signings were on August the 2nd, after there was an engrossed copy of the Declaration put out. John Hancock did in fact make a large signature that could be read by everyone, including King George. By the way, King George himself was the same age as John Adams. He was 40. Wow. And he ascended to the crown in his 20s. So all of these things that King George has done was done by a very young man. On August 2nd, all of the delegates who were present signed the document. If you look at it closely, it's done by delegation. New York's delegates, Pennsylvania's delegates, Massachusetts delegates. If you look closely at the South Carolina delegation, you will find the signature of Thomas Lynch, Jr. and a space. The space was for his father, Thomas Lynch, Sr., who had had a stroke. But they thought he was going to be able to come back and sign it. He, in fact, died. Not all of the delegates signed it. The last signature was in 1777. There were people who were not even delegates to the Constitutional Convention when it was passed, signed the document. In all, there are 56 signatures. And in fact, you were signing your death warrant. General Howe and Franklin had a previous relationship in England. General Howe and his brother Admiral Howe had lost a brother in the French and Indian War when the colonists fought on the side of Britain. And we gave him every military honor you can imagine. When I say that Franklin had access to people at the highest echelons of British society, we're talking about the Howes. Word came to Franklin, when he was still in London, that there was a chance that things would turn around. He was invited through an emissary to come play chess with the Howe brothers' sister. And then he was invited back, and invited back again. And they opened a line of communication between the general and the admiral and Franklin. But Franklin was no longer welcome in England. He was persona non grata for all of the trouble he had caused and how he turned against everyone. I want to just take a moment before I forget. Yesterday was the 250th anniversary of the passage of the Declaration of Independence. Little noticed and little spoken about. It was also the 200th anniversary of the deaths of Thomas Jefferson at Monticello and John Adams in Quincy, Massachusetts. They died on the same day, the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Declaration of Independence. You couldn't write it. I think I saw a hand here.
Doctor, I just had a question about your personal life, if you don't mind. You referenced your wife, Debbie, as your friend. And I was wondering, I had heard rumors that she ran the business while you were away after you retired. Is there any truth to that rumor? And also, was it a love relationship or was it just a marriage of convenience?
Their courtship is a thing of legend. When Franklin arrived as a runaway, and a runaway the law was chasing because he had broken the promise of his apprenticeship, his indentured servitude, and come to Philadelphia, he had a few coins in his pocket. He offered a few coins to the boatman who had taken him down. He actually, when he left and ran away, he sailed from Boston to New York looking for work. He was told there was no work for him in New York as a printer. He walked across New Jersey to the Delaware River, where he found a group of people who were almost rafting down the Delaware. And he got passage with them and arrived in the morning, a Sunday morning of that year. And he offered money to them for their passage. He offered a little bit of money. He had so little money to a woman and her child who were hungry. He went to a baker. He bought 3 puffy rolls, and he put 1 roll under each arm and had a 3rd roll in his mouth as he walked up Market Street in Philadelphia. And there he was seen by a young woman who is Debbie Reed. She said, "I thought you made an awkward and ridiculous appearance." He had dirty clothes coming out of his pockets. They developed a courtship. Franklin moved in with the Reed family and was boarded there. And there was talk of marriage. Her mother said, that guy isn't going to amount to anything. He's a printer. You can do better. Franklin was offered a chance to go to England when he was 19 years old by the governor of Pennsylvania. Said, if you go, I will use my letters of credit to set you up in a printing business right here in Philadelphia. He promised Deborah that he would write every day. He wrote once to say he was not returning anytime soon. In the meantime, Deborah married a potter. It didn't last. He ran away, probably to the Caribbean. Franklin comes back. He finds Deborah with basically nothing. She's been an abandoned wife. Franklin resumes his friendship with her. And it is a friendship and more a partnership than it is a love affair. And she cannot marry because she is not divorced. She is abandoned. If she marries and commits bigamy, she is subject to lashes, if not imprisonment. So they continue their relationship, and in 1730, out pops William from this other woman. He needs a wife. She needs a husband, so they moved in together. We would call it just living together today, but they lived together in a common law relationship that was acknowledged. And she eventually, when he was gone for all of those years, she ran the business. Not the printing business, he was retired from that. She had a little bookstore kind of place, sold stationery and the like. They had only lived in rented houses. When he came back for those 2 years of the 17, they made plans to build this wonderful house together. And then he was called back to London. He would never see her again. He would never see her again. And if you read Cokie Roberts, she will tell you in Founding Mothers that Franklin was a scoundrel, and the only reason he came back from England was to take the business over again and to live in the house. Well, I believe Cokie Roberts or not. Bless you, Cokie. From that on. But I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
What was Thomas Paine's role in the creation of the Declaration of Independence as far as you are concerned?
Franklin knew Thomas Paine from London. Franklin helped Paine edit Common Sense. Is it Common Sense? No.
Yeah.
Edit Common Sense. They had a relationship. And Paine reading of Common Sense over the colonies stirred up the rebellion and certainly kept anti-British sentiment going during that time. But in terms of their close relationship and the relationship with Congress, he was a writer of some influence, but not taking part in the Continental Congress.
And he didn't actually do any writing of the Declaration of Independence, because I thought I'd heard that he did.
He may have influenced Jefferson and Adams and Franklin, but as far as I know, he had no hand in the writing of the Declaration.
Just, I wanted to mention on August 23rd, we have a speaker that's going to be doing just Thomas Paine. So if you want to hear about that, we're going to have a speaker on August 23rd that's going to cover Thomas Paine.
August 23rd, Thomas Paine speaker will be here. That's great.
Well, it's now 2026, Dr. Franklin, and we have these things called podcasts. And I would like your opinion On Friday, I listened to the New York Times, The Daily, and it was on the Founding Fathers. And they were clear that the myth of the Founding Fathers over generations has been, in many ways, a myth, not to negate the work that they did. And that while we look at them like men of God and looking out for values like truth and justice, that in fact they were mostly wealthy landowners who were doing this to protect their land and their wealth. And I know there must be a balance there somewhere, but I'm wondering what you think about that.
The question, if you haven't heard it, is what role did the Founding Fathers, being land rich and prosperous people, have to do with the Revolution? And I would say that there were probably more rich landowners and businessmen who didn't become revolutionaries and didn't join the cause. Their fortune, like Mr. Galloway's, lay in good relationships with the Crown. Mr. Galloway left Pennsylvania and moved with thousands of other loyalists back to England. They got the heck out of Dodge because these revolutionaries, even though they were rich men in some cases, they were also stockkeepers and businessmen of lesser note. Basically, that didn't have much to do with it one way or the other. It was, do you believe in breaking the ties with Great Britain after all the things they've done? You can imagine a guy running a business when the Stamp Act is passed. And basically it's his job to sell these stamps on all kinds of things, from playing cards to marriage licenses and the like. And he's trying to keep track of what do I owe the Crown and what do I keep for myself. It was a mess. And the fact that some of them revolted, good for them. There was no taxation without representation. They were taxing us without a voice in Congress. And as I said in a previous speech once, I don't know what I said.
You were 70, of course.
It comes back to me all the time.
I
Yes,
have a
ma'am.
quick question. So the Founding Fathers said that they gave us a republic if we could keep it.
No, they did, well, okay.
If we could keep it. I give you a republic if you can keep it. So now in 2026, do you think we can keep it? They changed the conversation because we dwell in conversations, and let's face it, the Declaration of Independence was a change of conversation, and it changed. Can we keep the republic? Can we keep the republic that they gave us? It was a republic upon which it stands, one nation. You know the rest.
Let me tie a couple of things together. The Declaration of Independence is a broad document of mission statement, basically. The Constitution, which is signed 11 years later, is the law of the land. And Franklin took part in that. And Franklin said, this is not a perfect document, but you have to let it live and so forth. You have to be able to have a constitution that means something. When he's walking out of Pennsylvania State House, Mrs. Elizabeth Powell, the top socialite of the time, stops him and says, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? A republic or a monarchy? And Franklin responds to Mrs. Powell, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. That is in 1787. It becomes ratified in 1789, and it has been the law of the land ever since, and it has been a republic ever since. It has survived the British invasion in 1812. It has survived the Civil War. It has survived the Great Depression. It has survived World War II. and it will survive today. Altered, interpreted in ways that many of you won't like in the present moment. But look at all the things we have been through since 1787. And the Republic has survived. The Republic will survive because men grow old and men die and voters vote. The Republic will survive.
One last question. Could you just talk about the Boston Tea Party?
I could if I were there.
Oh, okay.
Franklin's far away in England and has little to do with the Boston Massacre, has nothing to do with the Boston Tea Party, although the blowback where he is trying to maneuver in the Houses of Parliament and with the ministers of King George III, they're madder than hell. They have established a monopoly by the East India Company, and these roustabouts have thrown 64 tons of tea into Boston Harbor. Tons of tea into Boston Harbor. In Charleston, they have gone out and taken the East India Company tea and placed it in a cold, dark, damp customs house where it will be allowed to rot. And they know about that in England as well. They know that this company has been ruined by these people in Boston. We need to send more troops over there to bring some sanity. And when you send more troops, you will have more war. So, thank you very much for the privilege to be here.